Hey Crosby, good main post. So I am going to touch on some of the things that you wrote. I agree with you that it does show great strength in, and even just her character development. Describes her, being, beautiful when she was younger. She was just kind of beaten down by this terrible husband that she has. And so it does show that she had great strength, not only within herself, but in her faith. As you go on in another question, does talk about her going to church. And so I think that, she was upholding her Christianity by not leaving her husband. And then on the other hand, just the time frame of this, women, especially African American women, did not have a lot of options. And so she's just kind of stuck in this place. The example of the snake, that being her greatest fear, and then that being what emerges here, would be a really good example of irony. And so I'm not sure if you picked up on that, but that would be an example of irony. I want to talk a little bit about her and the story. One, she's one of my favorite authors, but as you know, it was written by Zora Neale Hurston. And you may have found this a little bit difficult to read, but what she wrote in was called the Black Vernacular, or sometimes called the Black Dialect, because she's the one who paved the way for it to be okay to do that. Because back in this time frame, it was around the time when the Harlem Renaissance was getting big, and people wrote to the white man like a white man, because that's who read the books. That's who bought the books. And so that's who were considered the educated ones. And, if you go back to slavery times, African Americans were not allowed to read. They weren't encouraged to read. They weren't taught to read. They were actually whipped, punished, even killed for simply doing something that we take for granted, such as reading. And so when people would write something, you didn't want to sound black. You just didn't. And so she came forth. She was very educated and said, I'm going to write like I talk. This is my heritage. It's my culture. It's my people. Doesn't mean we're uneducated. We can't help that we were slaves. We can't help that we were oppressed. And she's very right. And so she started writing as she spoke in this black dialect. First, the African American race were not happy with her at all. And their attitude was, how dare you portray us in such an uneducated light? And her defense was, I'm not uneducated. I'm actually very educated from a very prestigious university, and this is how we talk. And this gives us a better representation of this time frame, which is what she wrote. They're called historical fictions. And if it had not been written this way, we wouldn't have gotten in depth in the story. We wouldn't have felt as connected and gotten to know the characters as much, because this was more real life in a historical sense, not in this specific story, but that time frame, the language, the setting, the Eatonville being the first black town, which is actually true. And so that would be an element of truth to this, to make this a historical fiction. So if you would have had these characters talking like the white man, it would not have been as effective and not have been as real. So because she did this, she paved the way for Langston Hughes, people like Alice Walker, if you've heard of her. But a lot of authors, both black and white, will attribute their successes and their writings to Zora Neale Hurston, because she probably has one of the most longest lasting and prolific impact in American history in writing and literature. So I hope this taught you a little bit more about her. So keep up the good work.